Doctor Who Season 12 is a very important and noteworthy era of the show, introducing a fresh face and moving from the Barry Letts era into Hinchcliffe's vision for the series. In this review, I'm going to talk about my overall feelings on the season, as well as more specifically, how Season 12 made that transition into this new version of Doctor Who, the strength of its fresh stories and characters, and what holds it back the most for me from being even better than it is. I'll keep this review spoiler light, so I wouldn't worry about any major plot revelations of these stories, just in case you haven't seen this season, and with that said, let's get started. Just to put this season in context, the year it came out, 1974, this was only the fourth ever Doctor that audiences had seen, and the previous one, Jon Pertwee, having been there for 5 years, was basically the face of the show for almost half of its run. And throughout that Barry Letts era, there was a very distinctive style and vision for Doctor Who, and it's not easy to confuse an episode from that era with really any other era, because you watch it and you really get a sense for the style that they're going for and the kinds of stories that they are trying to create. And I think probably the length of that era, running across 5 years, does help to explain why they took the direction they did with Season 12. Instead of just starting things brand new and fresh with a wholly distinct era of the show right from the first serial, Barry Letts stayed on for one more story. So his run was from Doctor Who and the Silurians to Robot, which is why this thing does feel like a holdover from the previous era of the show, because it really is. This is the last Barry Letts story on Doctor Who, and you can really tell that it is the exact same kind of style that they were going for throughout that entire era, except of course, it is a different Doctor, which is why this thing feels so different than really any other episode of the show. So the story serves really as the main transition between these two eras, with Philip Hinchcliffe's starting in The Ark in Space, and Jon Pertwee's having ended in Planet of the Spiders. Robot exists in this weird zone that doesn't quite feel right, at least for me. I know the opinions on this episode do vary, and I did ultimately like what we got with it, but because it's being used as this transitionary piece, I don't think it ever fully manages to be a standout story on its own, and for me has a bit of a strange style to it, even though I actually enjoy it. But once you move from that, you get The Ark in Space. And The Ark in Space has a very distinctive vision and style, where this season truly finds its voice. It feels completely different to what we've just gotten before it, and like an absolutely fresh take on the show. It's the same Doctor as before, the same crew as before, but the approach to the story is very different. It's kind of a Base Under Siege story, which we have seen before, but the approach to it, really does feel different, and the way that it goes about it. I think if you want to get an idea as to what the Philip Hinchcliffe era is truly like, this is a great story to get that taste, because it is quite dark in places and has those more grim elements within it, but there's also a ton of fun to be had within here, which is something that the Philip Hinchcliffe era does manage to balance pretty well, if you ask me, having these rather dark things that it plays with, while also just having fun with the characters and the setting. And that's basically it. This transition takes place across these two stories, and obviously I do like the second of them much more than the first one, but neither are remotely bad, and both have a fair amount to enjoy about them. And in those middle 3 stories, you really do feel like this is a wholly fresh vision for Doctor Who, and for me, I had a blast with it. It's so distinctive and unique in its style that you compare it to anything previously from Doctor Who, whether it is a William Hartnell serial, or a Patrick Troughton serial, or the more recent Jon Pertwee ones, those middle 3 stories really do feel like something new, and that's what I love so much about them. Their ability to feel fresh and also just be fun and tell interesting and flat-out engaging stories. Sure, the season does take a little bit for you to find yourself in this new era of the show, but once you get there, it is totally worth it, and it really is those stories, the middle ones, that define Season 12 for me. When I think of this season, I think of the new style and approach that was done with it, and I typically think of one of those stories. And more specifically, just that overall vision for the show. Maintaining quality across this season is something that was mostly done well. Not entirely, but there's a lot of areas where they just did a really good job. And that goes for the fresh stories, the characters, and just all of what was showcased, even the villains. And one way that you really get the sense that everything is connected together is the way that each story leads into the next one. So you'll end Genesis of the Daleks, and you'll wind up at Revenge of the Cybermen. And I really do like that as an element within this season. It harkens back to those Hartnell stories where you would end and transition right into Marco Polo after having finished Edge of Destruction. I like that kind of stuff because it really gives you the sense of every step that these characters go on. I know sometimes you'll have stories that are super isolated and could really have gone anywhere in an era of the show. You watch it and there's nothing connecting it to what just happened before or what just happened after. But I like the approach of just showing everything that these characters get up to. You get a sense of how they're developing as characters, of course, but you also get a sense of the time so you can see how that comes to pass and how Harry becomes adjusted to this world of traveling in all of these different locations and planets and seeing all of these creatures and monsters. He has much more of an adjustment period than Sarah because she's already been doing this for a year, and it's nice to see these different perspectives in here and how they develop throughout this thing. And the dynamics of these characters I liked, all of them to varying degrees. Tom Baker's fresh take on the character of the Doctor that still feels familiar is really good because you definitely understand that this is a new approach to performing the character, but also feels very true to what we've seen before in William Hartnell, Patrick Troughton, and Jon Pertwee. He definitely has a more positive, jovial side to him, I would say, but that's something that all the Doctors have had before. We'd see Jon Pertwee smiling with Jo Grant as they had fun together. We'd see William Hartnell come to really enjoy his time with Barbara and Ian, and of course Patrick Troughton was just a delight. You watch this Doctor and he's very distinctively different in the ways that he performs the character, but suffice it to say, I love Tom Baker's performance, and the further you get into this thing, the more of a sense you get that he really has a grasp on the character. He's of course the Doctor right from the first episode, but as he has to deal with more complicated and interesting situations, you get some really good material from that character in the dialogue and the conversations that he has, as well as just the nuance of the performance. So obviously the Doctor is great, and Sarah Jane is proving to be a really good companion, and I think the character really improved from season 11, both in terms of the writing and the chemistry. She's really enjoyable to watch and is quickly becoming a favorite of mine, to be honest. I love the dynamic she has with the Doctor. They have so much fun together, and the almost sort of bickering rapport that she has with Harry is enjoyable to watch as well. I liked her in season 11, but here she is really much more defined as a character for me, and an absolute standout from this entire thing. I think she's a ton of fun, and sure, in some stories, perhaps she doesn't get as much to do as you'd like to see, but regardless, when she's around, I really enjoy her presence, especially the chemistry that she has with Tom Baker's Doctor. And Harry does prove to be likable, despite aspects of his character that I did find distasteful, the sexism.
Fancy a member of the fair sex being top of the totem pole.
I do believe Ian Marter does a solid job in the part, and like him within this dynamic. He's probably my least favorite here of the group, but I enjoy what he has to offer, and I think that he brings a fair amount of fun and charisma to this character that a lesser actor probably wouldn't have been able to land. And I already talked about the distinctive style and vision for the show, but for me it is Genesis of the Daleks, the Sontaran Experiment, and the Ark in Space, which define this season. That's the middle portion of the story, and in terms of just maintaining quality, they do a lot of heavy lifting because they're all good or great, and some moments from throughout the middle portion of this story are just fantastic. These three may not fully fit with the opener of the serial or the closing one in terms of the actual quality, but each one of them just adds a lot to making this season as memorable as it was, and honestly, just as good as it was. I don't want to talk too much about specifics of these stories just because that's not really what I'm here to discuss, and I already have reviews of them, but I will say that if I'm, say, visiting your house and you've got one of these stories playing, then I'm gonna have a good time. And for as much as I do like this season, it is imperfect. And here's what I think holds it back. The beginning and the final story, while not bad, prevent season 12 from being among the show's best. Taking a whole serial to transition into a new Doctor is okay, but choosing to use the same format as was used for years with Pertwee's Doctor left an odd taste in my mouth, and it served more as a delay to the new era. I think if this one had just done something a little bit different, then I would have enjoyed it more. I probably would have gotten more from the experience. But as it stands, it succeeds in what it's trying to do. It's just not something that I'm going to want to revisit all that much. As I've said in my review, I liked the story, but I still wish that different choices were made when approaching how you introduce this new Doctor and begin a new era of the show. And the final story, Revenge of the Cybermen, just isn't very good. I mean, sure, it is Hinchcliffe, but it's one of his dullest ones, unfortunately. I don't want to discuss too heavily the reasons why it doesn't work, but to just put it simply, this thing bored me. You have lots of scenes in caves, ill-fitting music, characters I don't care about. The Cybermen are okay, but they do feel like they're wasted within this story, and it's one of those things where I really want to like it, but I just find myself kind of bored watching it. I was actually quite interested when I released my review, seeing responses from commenters about how much they enjoyed the story, and there wasn't much love for it. I think the best response that I saw was somebody said, "I liked it 6 out of 10." Which is a fair response, and of course some people liked it a lot less, but that response from people, some of which I'm sure are watching, hello, does make sense because the story just fails to do very much, and maybe that's okay, because at this point in the season you have gotten quite a lot, so when you end with Revenge of the Cybermen, even though it is disappointing to me, it does feel like, okay, well, this season already offered me enough, it's kind of earned a lesser quality story. It's not like you start with this one and Robot, and it's like, oh my god, when is this season gonna get good? You've already had that good stuff, so while it's a shame that it ended on a lesser note, it's kind of okay simply because the quality of those middle three stories was so high. And that means that when you look at season 12 on the whole, what you have is a 20 episode season comprised of 12 episodes right in the middle, which are all very enjoyable or excellent. The beginning feels a tad out of place, and the ending is a bit bland and unenticing, so it's an interesting trajectory for the season, but I can't complain too much about the stories that I don't enjoy as much because, either they are genuinely pretty good, or honestly I can't be that mad because so much of the rest of season 12 was really great. Ultimately, season 12 proves to be another strong season for Doctor Who, and while somewhat mixed, contains some really great stories and characters which help to make this season quite a bit of fun to watch. It may not go down as the most consistent season of the show for me, but it's one I think of quite fondly and believe has some truly fantastic moments within. I had a really good time watching this one, and I'm going to give Doctor Who Season 12 a rating of 8 out of 10. And that does it for today, folks. Feel free to let me know what you think about this season of the show, whether you liked it as much as me, or have an entirely different take. I'd love to know what you think if you feel like sharing, and if you join me this upcoming Sunday, I will be bringing you a ranking of the 5 stories from this season. So I hope to see you around for that, but if not, that is totally cool, so long as you know that I appreciate your time here today. And with that said, thank you very much for watching, take care, and have a lovely week.